because it takes a second. Um, okay. I'm going to use this control room. Hello. So my name is Ada, and I am the founder and CEO of Skillcrush, and I'm super excited to invite you to another webinar here at Skillcrush. Today, I was about to say client. No, my guest, because we're going to be talking a lot about clients in this webinar, but my guest is the wonderful Basha Rubin, and she is the founder and CEO. I'm going to put her on the screen for a second. Basha, wave. That's your cue.
Hi.
So Basha is the founder and CEO of an amazing company called Priori Legal that she's going to tell you about in much greater detail. But really, what the mission of their company is to make really high quality legal services available to everyone at any stage in the growth of your company or freelancing career. So what we're going to be talking about today specifically is really geared towards those of you out there who are thinking about going out on your own and doing some what's called contract work, meaning freelance work, where you're not going to be working under sort of the protective umbrella of an employer. And we're going to be talking about sort of some of the legal do's and don'ts for freelancers. And in particular, we're going to talk about the key elements of freelance contract so that you make sure to protect your work, your time, your money, and yourself. We're also going to be talking about we're going to go over some clear and easy to understand definitions of some of the must-know legal concepts for contract work so that you make sure to avoid sort of common freelancer beginner mistakes and make sure to include all the stuff that you really need to have in that contract. And then we're going to answer sort of the question that is probably on most of your minds, which is, when is it okay to sort of DIY your own legal? And maybe find a contract and modify it, and when is it really important that you actually pony up some money, hire a lawyer, and we're also going to be talking, and this is something that Basha deals with a lot and is happy to, I'm sure will be happy to answer your questions about sort of, how much money should you be looking to spend, how can you possibly minimize your costs, especially when you're just getting started, when to sort of bring in a lawyer, how much involvement to have a lawyer, how much involvement a lawyer should have in the beginning of your company, and all that good stuff. And this is just, super important for if you're going to go out there and, put yourself online and work with clients. It's really important that you protect yourself and don't risk more than you're already going to be risking. So a couple of housekeeping issues before we start. And first is that we would love for you to tweet anything that you think is cool that you're learning in this webinar. And when you do that, make sure to just include at Skillcrush and at Priori Legal. We would really like to answer questions. Obviously, this is not an opportunity for us to give specific legal advice. It's really important that you all understand that we're going to be talking sort of about generalities, and every single situation is a case-by-case basis. So we won't be able to answer your specific personal legal questions, but if you have more generalized questions, we would absolutely love to answer them. So please use the Q&A module, which I will enable because I'm not 100% sure that it is enabled. Let's see if we can get that enabled. And the other thing is you can also just post comments below the Google Hangout on Google+, or also post comments in the Facebook chat. That is also below this if you're watching this on the webinar page, and we'll be sure to answer your questions after Basha has done her presentation. And lastly, of course, if you guys are familiar with Skillcrush, you're most likely familiar with the blueprints that we offer. And the reason why we're bringing this webinar is because we know that for a lot of you, your motivation for learning technical skills is that you really want to go out on your own and start to build your own career with your own client base. Get rid of that boss, be your own boss, work from home, work remotely, work from the beach in Thailand, wherever it is you want to work. You want to be able to have the flexibility to do that. So our blueprints are all about getting you the technical skills that you need in order to be able to do that. And then Basha's company, Priori Legal, is all about getting you the legal protection you need in order to do that. So that is all our housekeeping. I'm now going to talk a little bit more about Basha, and then I'm going to hand it off to her because she's the expert, and she's going to talk through all of the important legal stuff that you need to know if you're going to venture on your own. So a little bit of background about me and Basha. Basha was the very first friend I made in college. We met on a freshman orientation trip before school even started. It's been really fun, I think, for both of us to sort of you know, she and I we're very close all of college, but I think we took somewhat different paths through college and then definitely went in very different directions after college. And I think it's been really fun for both of us to sort of find that even though she went to law school and I became a, you know, crazy out there artist, we ended up back together again here, both doing entrepreneurship and running businesses that are online. So like I said, Basha did go to law school, although, and she'll probably maybe talk about this, that she decided that for her it wasn't really the right choice to actually go and practice as a lawyer, but she still wanted to do work in the legal space. So she founded Priori Legal, and her motivation for that was really that she felt like there was a lot of lack of transparency in the legal space. It was hard to find good lawyers. It was hard to know how much you were going to have to pay for their services. And in general, just the whole legal scene is very confusing, and which is probably why you're at this webinar, because it is confusing. And I know I was super confused. And one of the great things that Basha has agreed to do at the end of this webinar is we actually gave her some of the contracts that members of the Skillcrush team used with their freelance clients, and she is going to rip them to shreds and tell us everything that we already knew we were doing wrong back then. But and lastly, of course, I should mention that she is a graduate of the esteemed Yale Law School, and she's also a member of the New York Bar, even though she is not using her membership at this moment. So, so before I hand this off to Basha and let her take it away, I just want to sort of frame sort of the discussion for you guys, and I want you to start to think about your own situation and, you know, think about what you should consider when it comes to contracts. And so I just wanted to ask a couple questions of the audience, and that is to say that I want to ask you, how many of you have told a client that I will have my lawyer write up a draft for us and then actually Googled for a template contract? I'm totally guilty of this. I definitely took my first contract off of the internet. How many of you have no idea what to put in a contract? And lastly, how many of you are worried about the fact that you don't have a contract in place, and what could you possibly do if, say, your client doesn't agree to pay you? So these are really, you know, these are questions that definitely hung over my head when I was doing freelance work, and I'm so glad to pass this off to Basha and have her once and for all, probably not once and for all, but for once get some clear guidance on what we need to put in our contracts, when we need a contract, and all that good stuff. So, Basha.
Hi, welcome. To you. Thank you so much, Ada. And Ada has promised to interrupt me if I get too boring or esoteric at any point, so please hold me to that. Thank you so much for spending part of your Friday afternoon thinking about the very exciting topic of contracts. As you probably know, contracts serve two really important purposes. One, and the more obvious one, is the framework for how courts would deal with a dispute if one came up, and what the sort of the framework that your lawyers would use. And second, and I think this is often for freelancers one of the most important functions that contracts serve, is setting clear expectations up front so you're on the same page as your client, and when something goes wrong, there's a document that you can refer to. Word about Priori, we freelancers with an end. I founded Priori because I really believe that lawyers help businesses at every stage of the game, that they're an integral part of any team. And I think for freelancers in particular, a lot of the concerns that Ada articulated are really real. If you don't get paid, there's much sort of less recourse in the ordinary ordinary business than there might be in other circumstances.
If I could just interrupt for a second, Basha, sorry. Yeah. Because your mic cut out for just 1 second, but I thought it was a crucial second, so I wanted to repeat it. That that you were saying that one of the most important feature or sort of reasons to have a contract is that you sort of get an opportunity to go over the expectations both for you and for your client. Mm-hmm. And yeah. I think that's a really important point, because it's like, yes, it is a legal contract and it's important to have it sort of, you know, legally accounted for, but I think that's a really important step just like for a project management standpoint, right? So like in a way, I feel like this is a way in which having a legal contract sort of makes you adhere to best practices both from a legal standpoint and from a project management standpoint, because it gives you an opportunity to have the conversations that you really need to have that aren't always the easiest to have about what expectations are on both sides of the table.
Yeah, definitely. That was a very good way of putting it. And sort of on that same note, setting appropriate expectations about the content of work, standards of work, timeliness for delivery and acceptance, payment terms and liabilities and warranties avoids a lot of problems in the first place for exactly the reasons Ada just said. You get on the same page as the client, everyone knows exactly what has to be done and when. And that just avoids a lot of problems in the first instance. And also, then at the next step, if there is a problem, having a contract in place can keep the cost to resolution down. But
and when
as we all
say
know,
timeliness and scope of work and warranties, we're just talking about sort
of
like...
We're going to find that later.
Okay, yeah. Sounds good.
But, you know, a lot of people don't use lawyers. You get contracts off the internet, get contracts from their friends, edit something time and time again, and this game. Contracts are extremely important, and having a bad contract isn't necessarily a step up for having no contract at all, specific to your industry and the job that you're doing. So after we talk about what is typically included in a contract provision and what in a contract, for freelancers, and what sorts of questions that you need to ask, we are then going to talk about when it's appropriate to hire a lawyer versus do it yourself. The short answer, not to give too much away, is that you should always hire a lawyer, but there are ways to use lawyers that are much more cost-effective than a lot of people think. So before I launch
I want to just highlight what you said again, which is that, you know, that having a contract is not necessary. Having a bad contract is not better than having no contract. I think, obviously, we're going to go into much more detail, but I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, a bad contract can really screw you over if it's not doing what you think it's doing. So before we launch into the meat of it, quick disclaimer, Ada made a similar one, but this presentation is informational only and is not presented as legal advice, nor should it be relied on for legal advice. Okay, cool. So what to include in your freelance contract. This should give you a sense, basically, of what the options are and what the right questions to ask are, as well as, in a very general sense, not industry specific at all, what types of things ought to be included in any and some of them are broader and some are just little nitty things that a lot of people don't adhere to but actually have pretty big consequences down the road. We're going to go through 10 key aspects. The first, and what seems like the simplest but is very important and a lot of people don't do, is who's bound by it. You need your name, your address, contact information, client's name, address, contact information, and a place for you both to sign and date it. And if you were going to, throughout the contract, refer to someone as client or designer or a freelancer, you need to clearly define that at the outset, who you're referring to, and this applies to any terms of art as well. Just, it's very important to be as clear as possible so down the road you don't run into any problems. And the other point I want to make here is that electronic signatures are fine. People always get very anxious about it, but totally fine, doesn't make a difference. So second, and most freelance contracts I've had do a pretty good job of this, but I've seen it's scope of work. So you want to define what you're delivering, when you're delivering it, how many rounds of revision there are going to be, and the process for amending any of those things. So, you know, a lot of times we start out with a project, and then as it goes along, you might realize, a client might realize that they want something pretty different, and you need to really outline the processes and procedures if that's the case. and being as specific and precise as possible about what work you'll do is very, very helpful. And, you know, other questions to ask here are sort of what materials are you going to use? Are you going to need to purchase them? Who's going to be responsible for them? And all that sort of stuff. So, you know, I think people are pretty good about including it, but just to encourage you to clearly articulate your deliverables and delivery dates as well. Delivery, acceptance, and standards. So what's the process for accepting and rejecting the work, and what's standards in use? So this is something I actually see missing a lot of the time, and I believe it's missing from all of the Skillcrush contracts we're going to look at afterwards, but it might be in one. But it's a timeline for acceptance or rejection of the material, of whatever it is. So if you're delivering them a website, when do they get to say, I reject this, this isn't what I asked for? And so, for instance, you can write something in that says if the client doesn't reject delivery within 5 days in writing, it's considered accepted. And this can be really helpful in preventing problems down the line. And there are lots of different ways to do this, but you know, it's helpful. It can be helpful to have something like that in there. There's often also a
Oh, no, sorry. There's a slight delay. I was going to say that, you know, I think from a client perspective, clients tend to be really, really nervous. Like, they really want to make sure that they understand exactly when they're going to get what they're going to get. But I would say, like, from the provider perspective, my biggest challenge with my clients is often getting them to adhere to a schedule. So I would deliver something on time, and then they would wait forever to give me, and stuff would just start to drag out, and all of a sudden a project that was really profitable becomes like horribly unprofitable because you're having to do it way down the line. So I think it's like, this is a really good example of one where as a provider you don't necessarily think about how this can protect you, but it's really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Completely true. And as is the reform, there are lots of different standards that can be written in. Something you see a lot is a professional and workman, and that's in case there's a problem down the road.
Sounds like we've lost Basha. Basha. Basha, it looks like you're frozen.
I can hear you. Can you not hear me?
Well, now we can hear you again, but we're not seeing you anymore. Oh, and you're back.
Oh, I don't know what happened. I could hear and see you the whole time. What's the last thing you heard?
I think I got totally distracted by being like, oh no.
Okay. So performed, you could think about having one. And then finally, under sort of delivery and acceptance, how will the work physically be delivered to the client, and who bears the risk of loss? For instance, the damage for getting into the clients. They're something you talk about a lot in the bar exam, but you know, the example is someone commissioned a painting, and you spend all this time working on it, you're thrilled with it, you send it, you give it to FedEx, and FedEx destroys it. And depending on what your industry is, this could be an important thing to make sure you've included in your contract. Again, it's important here to be very precise. What the payment's going to be, when it's due, and what happens if it's late. Is it going to be fixed or hourly fee? Will you invoice the client? When will you invoice the client? How long does the client have to pay? Is there interest charged if they're late? Do you stop work if they're late? Is there a particular way that you want payment? What happens if the client cancels the contract? Is there a kill fee if the client cancels mid-project? And that's, if you don't know, when you would charge them an amount for canceling the project. And if the scope of work is changed or revisions are needed, do you set a rate for that in advance? Next, most freelance contracts that I've seen include something that explicitly states the nature of the relationship as an independent contractor relationship, and that nothing in it forms an employee-employee relationship, joint venture, co-ownership, agency, or partnership. And you should also think about non-disclosure, non-disclosure and non-solicitation clauses. If you or your client is sharing any confidential information, you might want to include a non-disclosure clause that, and these can be drafted in a variety of different ways, with a time bar, destruction of information requirement. It's pretty context specific. Similarly, a non-solicitation clause. Non-solicitation clauses would prohibit either both of you or one of you from hiring the other's employees or contractors. So if you're for a certain period of time, so you know, if you have a contractor that you've brought in to do the project with somebody, and the employer and your client loves them, they can't hire them for a year or something like that. Next, and probably one of the meatier topics for this audience, is ownership and intellectual property. As you all know, intellectual property is the core of your business. It's what you're making, and we need to figure out who owns it and who owns it when. So I thought at the beginning we would briefly
Okay, it looks like Basha cut out at a crucial moment again. But I just wanted, so as soon as Basha gets back, we're going to be talking all about intellectual property, which is a really big topic, and it's definitely one, especially that I think as freelancers you're really going to care about, and your clients are super duper duper going to care about it. I don't think there was any clause in any contract that I've ever dealt with that has been so frequently talked about, hotly contested, things like that. And, you know, a lot of it is going to come down to, and again, we'll wait for Basha to like really weigh in here because she's the expert, but in my experience, you know, a lot of it is like you sort of have to figure out what the working relationship is, what your role is on the team, and sort of fit the intellectual property agreements to fit that. And just be really honest with your clients. So you have to figure out why would you hold on to some of the intellectual property of the work that you're doing, and if you are going to hold on to it, like what that means, what it means for the client, whether or not that could or could not affect the price of the work that you're doing, things like that are going to be really important. And the other thing I just want to say that like Basha, I think, has been speaking to, I mean, it's always funny to me when I go through legal stuff because, I think Basha has rejoined. Basha, can you hear us? Well, anyways, I trust that she'll speak up. But whenever I go through legal things like this, like I think you have the sense that like a legal contract, and it's like filled with all this legalese, it's kind of foreign language, and you're like, I don't really understand it. But it's really common sense stuff, right? And it's really just about you know, being super duper explicit about your relationship. It's like being like a super communicator in a relationship, and making sure that you sort of talk through all the really important stuff. And I think one thing, you know, it's funny, I was thinking about this when she talked about kill fees. I think something like a kill fee as when you're just starting seems so crazy because you're, you know, at least from my perspective, like it was like I was asking people for like, I mean, I think the contract that I gave Basha was for $500 to make a website, which was great at the time because I was like, the fact that anyone will pay me to do this is amazing. But obviously in retrospect, like now having done contracts that were $5,000, $15,000, $50,000, things like that, $500 seems very, very low. And so the idea of like charging someone a kill fee at that juncture maybe isn't appropriate, honestly. That's totally fine. You're sort of going to have to figure out, you know, given where you are in your business and how comfortable you are. But I would say the thing that you have to keep in mind is that it's important to act like a professional, and professionals do ask for kill fees. So even though it might be hard to put something like that into your contract, hi Basha, I can hear you. Can you hear me? All right, we can hear her type. We can't hear her speak. So what I was saying anyway is that though it can feel really hard and intimidating to do something like put a kill fee in, I think that you have to remember that, especially in the position of client services, like your job is really to take your client and take care of them. And part of taking care of somebody is making them feel safe. And, you know, but part of making them feel safe is feeling like you're not a pushover and you're a professional and you're going to sort of, you're going to adhere to a certain rigor of work in the professional relationship, and also that they will adhere to, and, you know, and part of sort of you delivering in a professional manner is expecting them to comport themselves in a professional manner and to respect your time and talents, and respect the fact that you are turning down other work to work with them. So there is an opportunity cost that they need to be held responsible for if they should cancel something really last minute. The other thing I wanted to say is I know that we're covering a ton of ground, so we're going to make you guys a little bit of a list of sort of a checklist of do's and don'ts that we will. Basha, you're back. We're so happy to have you.
I'm back on my phone, though, because
you can't get the internet to work?
I can't get the internet to work.
Oh, no. The phone's actually great. I'm like, I think this video quality is actually better than what we had before. So,
sorry, guys.
I was just talking about acting like a professional and asking your clients to act like professionals, and that being sort of even though sometimes like I think it can be a little scary to do things like ask for kill fees, you know, not to be afraid of that, because in a lot of ways acting like a professional makes you look like a professional, because that's what professionals do. They act professional.
I totally agree with that. I sometimes find that people take you more seriously when you're willing to do something like that. I know I certainly, when I work with a lot of freelancers in the context of Priori, and when people send me contracts that don't seem fully fledged or that don't seem like they know how to run a business, it makes me take them less seriously as a professional.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's funny. I've been working on this little unit that we're working on about cover letters, and anyway, to make a long story short, I started thinking a lot about sort of wanting to share my insights now as being somebody who hires a lot of freelancers or hires a lot of people, period, and what I think about. And you're totally right. Like, I want to know that you understand, like, how business works and, like, what the implications are of different things. And, you know, yeah, if you send me some ridiculous contract,
yeah,
like, I'm like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. So
exactly.
Cool.
And I would also say make sure you understand what's in your contract. On a similar note, I have had freelancers send me contracts, then I'll try and push back on a certain provision or ask questions about it, and they have no idea what it means, and that makes me really not take them so seriously.
It also makes it seem like it's even more likely that they probably got it off the internet, you know? Because usually if you get something from a lawyer, you talk through it with the lawyer and you kind of know what went into it. So, Basha, just as a reminder, we were talking about intellectual property, which is a super hot topic, and I sort of touched on that a little bit while you were off, but I would love to put you back in the driver's seat.
Yeah, where did what was I talking about?
We were just talking, you basically started talking.
So.
Yeah, we were talking about intellectual property, basically. You sort of got into that section about how that was going to, and sort of preface that was going to be one of the meatier topics, which I wanted to confirm that in my experience, I've never debated any section of any of my contracts more hotly than intellectual property with my clients. So
cool. So I guess I was talking for about probably 5 minutes before I realized that I wasn't on the air anymore, so I will go back to the beginning of that section when I was just going through the differences between trademark, copyright, and patent. This is one of the things that we actually see the most frequently. People are really, really confused about. So a trademark protects logos, names, symbols, and designs that distinguish the goods of one manufacturer or seller. A copyright protects original works of art, and a patent protects inventions, including business methods. And we're, I guess, in this context, going to be talking most robustly about copyrights, but I think it is important to understand the difference. People throw around the words as though they're synonymous a lot of the time, and they are not. So under U.S. copyright law, a company automatically owns the creative work of their employees, but not of their independent contractor. So it's important that your contract clearly articulate who owns the work and when they own it.
I just want to repeat that one more time. So that means that if you are working as a freelancer, you have to have a provision in this, because there isn't standardized. Is that right?
My understanding is the standard is that you continue to own it.
Okay. So that's good. So at very least, it protects the freelancer.
but most clients will not want that to be the case.
Sure.
So the questions that you need to ask here are you going to license it to them? If you're going to license it to them, is it going to be an exclusive license? So that means could you theoretically license whatever you're creating, your software, to someone else as well? My guess is that most clients will want either an exclusive license or for ownership to be completely transferred. And at what point is the ownership transferred? So is it transferred upon final payment? Is it transferred around their first payment, etc.? Who owns the rejected work? So if you're going through multiple revisions, or if you are, I don't know, when I had a logo made, they gave me 8 different logo directions to choose from. Who owns that? Could you reuse it for another client? Could they use it they rejected it, but then they decided actually it looked pretty good. Could they slap it on their website? Those are questions that a contract can answer. Are there any restrictions on use for either you or the client? So for instance, if you made a logo, can you also publish it on your site as part of your portfolio? I see a lot of contracts that have that provision in it. What about, do they have to attribute anything they use to you? So does it need to say, lovingly made by Ada Birnir? And are there any other constraints on how you can use the work or how they can use the work? And can the client modify the work? You made this beautiful piece of artwork for them, and they put a big smiley face in the middle of it before they hung it and then attributed it to you. What happens then? And these are things that I think are very industry specific, and also that you need to think about what you're comfortable with, what you want. And then the next set of questions on intellectual property have to do with who's responsible if the work infringes on someone else's intellectual property. So if you're making me, I say, make me this e-commerce website, I have this awesome idea for one-click buying, Amazon has a patent for that, who's responsible if Amazon then comes and sues us? And also, what standard do you as the freelancer have to use to make sure that you are not infringing on someone else's intellectual property. Cool. So next section is...
If I can just interject for a second. I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own experience. One is that with client work, you're absolutely right. I don't think I ever had a client agree that I would own the intellectual property of the work I did. So I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation. I feel like that's what you should expect. But that said, I thought that your points about sort of attribution and stuff like that, those are definitely sort of negotiating points that you can have. So you can say, yes, you'll have the intellectual property, but I would really and that's pretty common on websites, especially that sort of a link to the agency or the freelancer who made it is included. And honestly, that was a great way for us to get business. The other thing I wanted to say was that one thing that comes up, I think, with coding specifically is there's a lot of open source software that you're often building off of. So I always made sure to include provisions in my contracts that sort of acknowledged that and said that, obviously I'm responsible for making sure that those things are legal, but I just want to recognize that some parts of this are going to be kind of developer tools, and the client can't own them because nobody can really own them.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good point. There are things, and I don't know the specific wording of it, so don't quote me on it, but that you can say if you develop something that you want to use and reuse coding for other clients, it's a way to do something faster, whether that you retain the rights to that portion of that or whether that's transferred as well. So you also want to have a procedure for changing the contract. Is it mutual written consent? Is it something else? Or different things changed in different ways? Just something to think about. Cool. everyone's least favorite, disputes and terminations and termination. So how will disputes be resolved? You see a lot of contracts that mandate arbitration versus litigation. People have really different opinions on whether arbitration or litigation makes more sense. People think arbitration is faster, simpler, and less expensive than litigation a lot of the time, and they are binding on the parties and not reviewable by courts, which is something people are often confused about. They confuse arbitration, which is binding, and mediation, which is not binding. But, you know, if you want to have the ability to appeal what happened, you know, maybe arbitration doesn't make the most sense. Litigation is when you're resolving the dispute through the court system. It's the longest and long and costly. Most lawsuits, as we all know, I think, end in settlement. So, you know, just thinking about whether you want to include a provision that mandates arbitration in your contract. Also, and you should think about both venue and choice of law. You can say, you know, this will happen in New York, in the New York court system, and New York law is applicable. For instance, you know, if you're here and your client is in California, they might want the case to be litigated in California, and that's going to be a pretty big inconvenience to you. There are also certain circumstances where the laws of some states and for certain issues might be more or less favorable. So you want to think about that up front. If you want to fire your client, you want to think about how you do that, what they owe you, what you owe them. Similarly, if they decide to fire you, you need a sort of a method in place for severing the relationship to figure out who owes whom what and when. And this is, again, the kill fee that we discussed earlier. And then there's something called a force majeure provision, and that's what happens if the project needs to be terminated for reasons beyond your control. There's a terrorist attack, a hurricane, etc. Who's obligated and when. So our last section is a little bit of a hodgepodge, call it the legal niceties. Most contracts have a provision, and an important provision, called a merger and integration clause, and the purpose of which is to make sure, and so it basically says that this contract constitutes the whole agreement between the parties. And so down the road, what that does is if your client says, yeah, but Ada sent me this email saying that everything would be for free and you know, I could use it however I want it, you get to say, no, we have this merger and integration clause. This is the whole contract. And so that's really important. And then similarly, there is a severability clause, which says that if any clause of the contract is deemed to be unenforceable, the entirety of the rest of the contract stands. So if you've included something that the courts then say you couldn't have included, the rest of the contract is unaffected. And so these sorts of clauses, none of the Skillcrush contracts had either a merger and integration clause or a severability clause. And so it's another thing to think about. A limitation on liability clause, which is a provision that limits the amount of exposure the company faces in the event of a lawsuit. So, you know, you might see contracts where they say all these wonderful things, and they say, oh, no, our liability is limited at $100 if you sue me under it. So that's something both to watch out for in contracts that you're reviewing, and also to think about including in your own. And, you know, similarly, in different parts of the contract, there might be standards for when you're liable, so like negligence, gross negligence, etc. Other things to think about. There should be a line stating that your client agrees and accepts the terms of the contract. And are you still there? Oh, sorry. Yes. And this is critical in sort of above every signature line. So that is the very exciting end to defining what sorts of clauses are in a contract and the sorts of questions that you should be asking yourself, I might try Ada because I do want to go through your contracts to see if I can get back online on.
That sounds good. I will chat for a second.
Okay.
Sounds good. All right. So while Basha is while we get to watch her ceiling. So obviously we just went over a ton of material. This is not for the faint of heart, but we are going to provide everybody who's attending this webinar with a list of everything that we went over, which you can then take when you go to meet with a lawyer, so that you can talk about all these points. Obviously, lots of people go to law school for many years in order to understand all of this and keep it all in your head. And as a freelancer, one of the advantages to hiring a lawyer, which we're going to talk about next, is that you don't have to remember all this stuff. You just need to hire someone who's really excellent, who you trust, who will help you think through a lot of these questions. But, I think that it was important and interesting what she was talking about with regard to limit of liability clause, because especially, when we're working on the web, it's totally reasonable to have a limit of liability, right? It is complicated. If you're doing something like, rebuilding someone's website, and especially if they run an e-commerce store or something like that, you have to be careful because the work that you do, and if things go wrong, it could have real material revenue impact on your client. And it's important that you sort of address that and acknowledge that. And both as you comport yourself professionally, you want to make sure to take all the precautions that you can, but also, understand that you can't be wholly responsible for something, and make sure that you don't, it's all about sort of worst case scenario and making sure to protect yourself and making sure that you get to keep your house and your car and your, savings account when something goes wrong, or heaven forbid you should end up in the, crossing paths with a really terrible person. I also actually really love the part about firing your clients, because I actually think that this is a real rite of passage that most every freelancer comes to, and that's the moment in which you're working for somebody who you realize is just really difficult to work with, and you have to fire them. And I think for me, it's always been really nice to understand that when I get into a contract, although obviously the agreement is binding as long as we are in a contractual agreement with one another, there is some way in which I can professionally and ethically get out of the agreement should it really not be good for my mind, body, and business to continue to participate. Basha, I think I hear you typing. Are you back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, fantastic.
Can you see me?
Yes. We can see you. You're a little bit
cool.
stilted, but let's take a look at where you're going to screen share. And
I'm going to do.
I want to say one thing, which is that these are not Skillcrush contracts. By the time I got to Skillcrush, I had been around this. I'd been on this rodeo enough times to know to get some good contracts. But they are real contracts that members of the Skillcrush team used with freelancing clients before we were together in the Skillcrush and formed as the Skillcrush company.
Yeah, so we are going to start, I think, with the third contract, if you don't mind. Did that come up?
Absolutely.
It says website and design proposal for. Cool. So as you can see, this contract is pretty bare bones. Basically, all it includes is the scope of work at the beginning. This is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to use, and a little more detail about what that means, a budget, and an estimated timeline. So this is, it does a good job of defining what is going to happen, but it doesn't really give the protection against something going wrong and, sort of all the stuff we just discussed.
So can I ask a question about this?
Yeah.
Because to me this reads really, and I think actually on the title, I know that the team member who shall remain nameless who sent this to you, I know that she used it as her contract, but it really is like a proposal, right?
Yeah, so, exactly.
So my question for you is is this an example where nothing would be better than this, or is this an example where just at least this is something to start a conversation between you and the client?
It's so situation specific that I wouldn't want to speak to that, but I do. It does sort of clearly lay out what is going to happen. I don't think it necessarily does anything negative that I can see, but it does not really protect the freelancer adequately.
Got it. It's sort of like not doing harm, but it's not really helping you that much either, from a legal standpoint.
It's not doing harm in any way that I can see right now.
Okay.
If that's a fair.
And obviously, Basha is working off of limited information.
Yes. Cool. Let's move on to another contract. What do you see up right now? I just want to make sure. Is this services contract of development and design?
Yes.
Cool. So at the top, there is a definition section, which clearly lays out who the developer and who the client is, and says in a basic way what the services to be provided are, what the rate is. It has a date for an initial payment and a final payment, but doesn't give much more information about when that's going to be due. It says due upon receipt of invoice. Is that going to be at the beginning and the end of the project? We don't know from this. There's a stop work provision if payment isn't made for if it's more than 14 days late, but no interest is provided. So there's sort of some uncertainty around payment in this case. Also, what happens if more time that so we have here, we're dealing with copyrights. It says so this is exactly what we talked about. The copyright will be transferred upon payment in full, except, and this is again what we were just talking about, that the developer reserves the right to reuse and relicense portions of the created product as desired, as long as the portions or general solutions to common problems are not specific to the client's product. So this language is doing the work that we were talking about earlier, except maybe there's some ambiguity about, I think people would bicker about what common problems are and what is or is not specific to the client's product. And similarly, that's sort of similar for intangible property. Termination, this contract may only be terminated after all outstanding invoices have been paid in full. So, it might be a little, you could see some trouble.
Okay, so it sounds like Basha
come up if
Basha, we could lost you for just a minute.
For instance, want a contract. Am I back?
You're back. So you were starting to talk about termination. So you just want to start back at termination. Because termination is really important.
Sorry, my internet connection.
Oh. She cut out right in the middle of apologizing. So I know that she was talking about termination, and here I am. Which one was the? Are you back?
What?
Are you back? Okay, so she was talking about termination. Let me see 1 second. See if I can get Basha.
I'm back. Am I back?
You are back. Basha, do you want to send me, actually, okay. Can we hear you? I was going to say that maybe I will pull up the redacted contracts and we can take a look at them. while Basha is going. But anyways, so we're going to switch to questions in just a minute. So if you have any questions about contract issues that you have encountered, please go ahead and ask them. I see that there's a couple of questions that have come in through Facebook, so please, go ahead and add your questions while we have an expert on the line who is going to be able to answer them. I know that contracts are super complex and difficult. I'm really glad that we're talking about them now because they're super important. And I know that Basha also has a special offer for you in terms of if you are looking for for legal advice specific to your situation. So she is going to be sharing that with us when we get her back online.
Am I here?
You keep coming in and out, it sounds like.
Okay, let me call back in on my phone and we'll...
You're good right now. Why don't we go with this?
That? Okay. Well, anyway, I was just saying that the termination provision in this particular contract it seems very limiting and might limit a circumstance in which the freelancer wanted to terminate the contract as well. So we can maybe quickly look at one more contract, and then we can talk about when it is appropriate to do it yourself versus hiring a lawyer. I have some strong opinions about that.
Yeah, why don't we just skip right to that because we're running short on time and I want to make sure to have time for questions.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah, it's never okay to do it yourself. You should always hire a lawyer. Done. No, it is important as a freelancer who's going to be using and reusing contracts to talk to a lawyer to have them craft something for you. There are ways that you can really try and keep costs down, including, if there's a contract that you've been using or something like that, you can go to the lawyer with that contract and have them explain it to you, go through it with you, and draft and make any changes that need to be made. Second, and one thing I would really recommend is we see people making all sorts of edits to contracts on their own when they're negotiating with a client. The client
totally
says,
guilty of that.
please do this, and you're like, oh yeah, no, it seems fine. That's bad. A lot of times there are terms of art that change how a court will interpret the clause or contract. So what I recommend in that case is when you talk to a lawyer, and you don't need to talk to a lawyer once, and you say, these are the situations that I see coming up time and again. Clients, I want to give clients a non-exclusive license, but sometimes they want an exclusive license. Have them draft alternate clauses for you. So you go into a negotiation with one contract, and then if someone pushes back, and you've seen time and again that people have the same issues, questions, whatever, you have language that the lawyer has already drafted for you that you can leverage. And then, the other important point about hiring a lawyer is that it's good to have a relationship with a lawyer. There are lots of things that come up in the course of running a business or freelancing for which a lawyer can be deeply helpful, even for, a one-off question. I call my lawyer personally for Priori, at least a couple of times a month in the ordinary course of business when something comes up and I don't know the answer. And I only talk to them for 10 minutes, but it's tremendously helpful for me as a business owner. And if you don't develop that relationship early on, it's harder, it's hard to do it. And you don't take advantage of lawyers in sort of a regular way. There are lots of services out there, namely, Shake Law especially, that provide sort of more boilerplate contracts, and you can use them. Most studies have found that while those sorts of contracts tend to be better than not having a contract at all, hiring a lawyer is almost always better.
Yeah, so if I can speak about my personal experience, we didn't get to my really bad contract, but basically what happened was that I was using this contract with people, and there was a very, very unclear, murky intellectual property copyright agreement portion of it, and something came up, and basically it was that one of our clients felt that we were offering another client a design that she felt was too similar to her design. So she felt like she had bought it from us, Anyway, so this became a dispute, and it was one of those things where it's like you just don't know what people are capable of and like how miserable they want to make your life. And so we were lucky that I had a friend who had a sister who was a lawyer, so she put us in touch. And, you know, and I would say, like, one thing I learned in that experience is, like, it's not great to hire a lawyer when you're really stressed out. I got really, really lucky and ended up with a really fantastic lawyer who became a really trusted business advisor for me. But, you know, it's like, I just feel like when you have a tense situation, you don't always make the best decisions. You might not get a lawyer who's really good for you, all those things. And then I just wanted to confirm exactly what you said. I mean, I think that the relationship I had with that lawyer was sort of like the ideal relationship. And, you know, she taught me so much about business and legal issues that come up, and really was really critical also in helping myself and my partner at the time negotiate our business relationship, which is really, really important. And I think, so can be so much good. And what we found with her was that she was part of a small firm, but a part of a firm nonetheless. But she was very flexible on the rates. We totally paid late sometimes. I'm not saying that you should pay late, but I'm just saying that, like, it's absolutely possible to get really good legal advice from people who are really, really qualified, and where you maybe are one of their smaller clients, that they can be more flexible with payment for you. So don't be afraid of seeking out a lawyer. And I mean, she's worth every penny that we ever paid her. So
good. Yeah. No, lawyers, I found that when these relationships work well, they can be of tremendous benefit to the client. Unfortunately, people have a lot of really bad experiences with lawyers that color their willingness to talk to them. But, you know, there are very good lawyers who are not horrifically expensive, and investing in legal services now saves so much time and money and heartache down the road.
No, totally. And it's hard to quantify heartache, but it's real.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think maybe we should go to questions?
Absolutely. So we are short on time, admittedly, but one question that we have here is from Christopher, and he asks, how detailed do you get in ownership and intellectual properties, as in what ratio compared to the rest of the contract? So I think the question is sort of like, how much time is it appropriate to talk about, you know, how much space and time in the contract does it make sense to talk about intellectual property?
It's sort of an impossible question to answer. It's so specific to both you, your industry, what you're trying to achieve, and that's exactly why you should talk to a lawyer about it. You know, it just depends so dramatically. I only meant to emphasize it to say it's so important. It's such an important hinge for so many people, and it can cause so much trouble that I think you really do need to think carefully with the advice of a lawyer about how you want to structure it.
Yes, exactly. I think, you know, I would say, though, I like, what I've seen is that sort of the bigger the company, the more attention it will get, right? And the bigger the project. Okay, we've got another question. Hold on one second. Okay. So Ashley asks, what advice do you have about drafting and entering into contracts with long-term clients? For example, a prospective client contacted you for a one-time project and since has become a repeat client and wants to continue to add deliverables. How, as a freelancer, do you sort of deal with that situation? Because you created one contract, you need to create another contract, or can you add addendums? How does one handle that?
Yeah, so again, it depends on how your first contract was drafted and what the procedures that you implemented to change and addend it are. But oftentimes what you can do, how I've seen it done, and this is one of many acceptable ways to do it, is that the statement of work is attached as, you know, as an exhibit, and you can keep on adding new statements of work that add the deliverables.
Totally. Okay. So it definitely depends, but it's possible to sort of create one contract that manages your business relationship and then add to the scope of it. Another question is, when I'm going out to find an attorney, do I look for a specific type of attorney that deals with freelancers, or is just sort of a general business attorney? Like, how do I know if the attorney is the right person for me?
You know,
I was so excited. Oh, are you there?
I have so much advice on this topic that it's hard to. Yes.
Okay.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes.
Okay,
Hi.
we're back.
I need to fight with whoever installed our internet because this is really bad today. But you know, when you're going out and looking for an attorney, I do think it's important to find someone who has experience working with people like you, people in your circumstance. And you know, many corporate lawyers will have worked with freelancers. So what I would do is, when you talk to a lawyer, ask, you know, have you worked with people like me? You can even ask a lawyer for references. Most people I talk to haven't done that, but you know, often, you know, ask to talk to someone who was in a similar situation as you. Other sort of general advice about hiring a lawyer is hire someone you like.
Oh. Basha. I think we lost Basha, but I think her point that she ended on was brilliant, which is that you know, hire someone you like, which really goes for pretty much every situation. And you know, it doesn't mean that. Well, anyway, it just means that it's important to work with people that you like to work with. I know that one of the things that they do at Priori is that they make it really easy for you to find and sort of look through a bunch of lawyers. They also help
sort of don't think about it in quite those terms. But
Basha, I think we lost you for a bit. Oh, and then I lost her again.
Hi.
Hi. So, oh, excuse me, 1 second. But so you were talking about hiring people, but I guess I would really love for you, because we're over time, I want you to just talk a little bit about Priori and what you guys offer at Priori, and how our users might want to take a look at the services you offer, because you do make it really easy and cost-effective to find extremely good lawyers, and sort of talk about the process by which you do that. And I'm going to go answer the door while you're talking.
Okay. So at Priori, we connect businesses with a network of vetted lawyers at below market rates, and what that means in practice is that we reject about 80% of the lawyers who apply to participate in our network. We're very, very focused on the quality of lawyers we work with. We run a very rigorous admissions process, and then you receive a 15% discount off the lawyer's hourly rate or flat fee package through Priori. They offer 25% discount, and then clients pay us approximately
looks like we lost Basha again. Basha, are you back? Okay. Well, I think that we're probably going to wrap this webinar up. Hi, Basha. I was just going to wrap up the webinar because the gods seem to be transpiring against us. But I do know that Priori is really amazing, and it's possible to go on Priori and find a really good lawyer. I am a client myself of Priori, and I have a fantastic lawyer that I work through Priori with. And Basha has really generously offered everyone who attended this webinar a discount code. And the other thing that's really important to know about Priori is that you get matched up with some suggested people who are sort of fit your expertise, and then you can do a free consultation with them and sort of feel out whether or not it's a good relationship and if it's what you want. And Basha, I think we can hear you, so maybe if you want to try one more thing that you want to say before everybody takes off for their Friday afternoons.
Yeah, hire a lawyer. They make your life a lot better. And if you enter Skillcrush into your Priori lawyer request, you'll receive a 50% discount off our management fee, which means you'll get a 20% discount off the lawyer's rates as opposed to a 15% for your first Priori matter. And yeah, good luck.
Fantastic. So everybody, that's the discount code of Skillcrush. But
it's very hard to remember.
Yeah, we'll also make sure that you get that information as well as the list of 10 things that you got to think about when you do a contract. Feel free to follow up via email with questions if you have any. And otherwise, I just go forth and make money and get clients and do freelance, but do it in a way that's smart and protects yourself as you're doing it. All right, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to spend it with us for this hour. We're sorry about the technical difficulties, and we look forward to talking to you soon again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.